welcome to the program. Have you ever thought about the difference between how you consume media in today's world versus how you ever consumed it before? It's been a fascination of mine, potentially because I started my professional career in the media space. And when I was studying media and journalism, it was really all about television through over the air means with the old rabbit ears antenna for some, but largely cable television for others, and the traditional means of radio, though satellite radio had just become an option, a subscription option for people. But of course, over the last decade and a half, the advent of streaming platforms, and not just one, but many, has completely changed the way all of us consume entertainment, news, sports, live events, concerts, any other form of entertainment, because now we can curate our own programming anytime we want, right from our own living room. And we don't have to rely on a broadcaster to determine a schedule for us and then glue ourselves to it. Well, there's a lot of implications to that. And there's an entire community out there that spends a lot of time thinking about the streaming world. The nomenclature for that is the over the top community. And there's a good number of advertisers, broadcasters, content creators, movie makers, television producers who are trying to figure out the best way to approach our audiences in this medium. Well, I have a great expert joining me on the program today to talk about all of this. Our guest is Brian Mahony. He has a podcast of his own, which we'll promote, but he's the CEO and founder of Trender Research and the OTT Executive Community. He's joining us today to talk about the development of his research institute, his research company, and his company's analysis into consumer trends in broadcasting, content creation, content development, film, and streaming. He has an MBA in marketing and business strategy, so he has a good background in understanding how this business model is working and how advertisers are looking at it and how consumers are engaging with it. He's developed a 45,000 strong community of professionals in this entertainment sector, in addition to his own podcast, and it's made him one of the decade's top 100 voices in IP communications. In this episode, we're going to be looking at his insights into consumers, not just the tech savvy, but broadening consumer profiles to look at how people are choosing these over the top services, how they're adapting to the now relatively new but more established technology, and how the industry is responding, including to things like the rise of artificial intelligence. We're recording this program in 2023 amidst the strike in Hollywood among writers and actors. And at the heart of that issue, you may remember, which we will reference in the interview today, was the use of artificial intelligence, generative AI, and the intellectual property rights of any given actor or creator of content upon whom that AI was based. So it's a timely topic now, but I think years from now, this podcast will still age well as we take a look at what the trends were at this particular time period. Brian was short on time, so we weren't able to take a full hour, but we condensed a lot into a 30-minute conversation. And so join me for this conversation with Brian now. We go, as I said, about 30 minutes. And I think we covered a lot of important ground on this trend of media consumption. And whether you're running a small business, a large business, or a public policy maker, this is an important podcast for you to listen to grasp the trends in this space and how people are using it, because ultimately you have to send mass messages out into the market. But it used to be relatively easy, if expensive, to do that. Now it's a lot less expensive, but a lot harder to get down to just the audience that you're trying to reach in an effective platform. And hopefully, our conversation today gives you a better appreciation for all of that. So, I present to you all now my conversation with CEO and founder of Trender Research, Brian Mahony. All right, Brian, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, Brian. Glad to be here.
Excellent. So let's start out by sharing with folks a little bit about your company with Trender Research and the OTT Executive Community. I gave a little bit of an intro, but no one can do justice like the person who founded the company and is leading the community.
Thank you so much, Brian. Yeah, so I founded Trender Research in 2007 as a straight research company, looking at a variety of different sectors, media, entertainment being the lead, but also green tech and health tech and security and all these other things. Media and entertainment was the one that sort of like took off, and we sort of revectored in 2014 to focus exclusively on this emerging trend of over-the-top video (OTT). And so that's sort of the lead community that we've built. It's over 50,000 professionals globally, heavily skewed towards executives. We do an annual conference called OTT Executive Summit. We do meetups at shows around the calendar, and we still do custom research, but it's mostly in under the guise of sort of consulting work for clients, marketing strategy, product board level kind of strategy, and business development and that type of work.
So let's dive into the topic there of OTT, over the top, as you said. For those who are less familiar with it, although at this point I think most people have a pretty good handle, but define that for our audience and where we are in the maturity of that business model.
Yeah, so over the top just stands for a video or any kind of media service over the top of your existing cable, IPTV, or satellite subscription or service, right? So the whole idea of over the top and when that term came from is you weren't asking for permission from your cable company. So I have Comcast and I could subscribe to different video services. Initially, Netflix was the sort of the biggest and still, without having to pay anything to Comcast. And so that was the whole idea of it. And it's now sort of blown up into this larger concept of streaming, direct to consumer. Pretty much any media and entertainment company has sort of an OTT strategy. It's not really a consumer friendly term, though. They would think more of streaming. Yeah, not necessarily over the top, but that's sort of inside baseball term.
And who are the most successful players in this space today, and why were they able to stand out from the others?
Well, I mentioned Netflix. They're obviously they were the leader. They went from the DVDs by mail strategy and pivoted to streaming. And there was a time back in the day when people actually thought, "Oh my goodness, if all this video entertainment traffic goes onto the internet, will that break the internet?" I mean, there's serious concerns about that, whether that could actually happen. And there were a lot of rebuilding of the infrastructure to provide this new business model. But yeah, it started with them, and then now we see today Disney and Warner Brothers Discovery, Max, and all the really anybody involved in media entertainment, including studios, going directly to consumers with their content. Various business models we can talk about, whether it's advertising or subscription, but pretty much anybody that is in the media entertainment business has to have some sort of a streaming or over the top strategy these days.
So this was the big debate I think early on was the assumption that subscription would be a preferable model because people were sick of the advertising on their cable providers or their broadcast networks. But now we're seeing more and more advertising models come in on top of the subscription. So talk to us a little bit about what you're hearing in that community. Is the days of ad-free subscription models at risk? Are we going to be living with advertisements in our streams, or is there still hope that there's a subscription model that keeps that out?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, Netflix famously up until last year said they would never do advertising. They were subscription, video on demand, and SVOD service. You paid $10 a month. Now it's up to, I don't know, 15, 20. They keep raising their prices. And that seemed to be the sort of, they were the market leader, and that seemed to be the business model that we was following. Okay, if you had a library of 100 shows or 100,000 shows, you would put a price on that per month and you get access to all of that content. What's happened is all of these different services that consumers started signing up for started to add up, and it started to look a lot like your traditional cable package. And as a matter of fact, just this year, if you look at the basic, two or three core services that a consumer would sign up for, maybe two other kind of more niche apps or OTT services they'd like, it actually adds up to more than your traditional cable bundle. That happened just this year. So what ended up happening was a lot of the content players that didn't have their biggest library, maybe didn't have access to distribution, said, "Hey, let's do advertising." That's what we had back in the day with broadcast television, and it really blew up. And so this whole concept of a free ad-supported streaming TV service, FAST is the acronym, really started taking off 4 or 5 years ago. It just sort of exploded. Now there's sort of I think 2 3 thousand channel offerings you can have. Very low bar to entry, very easy to get a fast channel up, and it's all advertising based. So it's free. So consumers love that. Free is a great price point. They can sign up for it, and of course they get served ads. So that's the trade off. But yeah, that's sort of a major trend right now in the industry.
So many of these trends are often driven by the advertising community, right? They obviously have been underwriting the success of all broadcast for as long as there has been broadcast. And I imagine the subscription model was actually concerning to them, right? Because they wanted to be able to continue to put their products in front of people in a pay for model. So, how is the advertising industry reacting to all of this? And I'm assuming that they're the ones who are trying to get more of the advertising space in there, but are they approaching streaming differently than they did the old 30-second ad buy on a cable network or your local broadcast channel?
Yeah, I mean, I think this entire industry is driven by consumer behavior on one side and the people paying the bills, the advertisers, on the other side. The advertisers have jumped full stream, so to speak, into this marketplace because it gives them things they didn't get through broadcast and cable. The measurability, the targetability. Yeah, there was some abilities to do that based on households and things like that, but there were a lot of it was based on Nielsen panels. It was estimates really of how many eyeballs were actually tuning into an ad. And with digital and with streaming, it's very measurable. And now you can get down to not only the household but actually the user. You can measure, traditional TV advertising, but you can also look at mobile. You can look at connected TVs, the device, and each of those is a different experience and offers different opportunities for targeting the consumer.
So when you think about which ad forms are working well, one of the curiosities in streaming is, are people looking at that model the same way they did at cable or broadcast television? I think the old concern there was, well, people just sort of walk away from the TV during the ad break. Is that a similar behavior when you're watching something in a streaming service and maybe the ad break is only 90 seconds long? Are the advertisers thinking that this is actually a stickier model? They're more likely to actually see the ads that are being served up? Or is it the opposite? Is the fact that they're on streaming make them not want to see any ads?
No, you're right. I mean, I think they're recognizing that consumer behavior has changed. There was always the issue of you could turn off a TV and the set-top box would keep moving and they would think that someone was watching something there, right? And then you have this idea of a lean back kind of living room experience and a lean forward experience closer to your device, like a mobile device. The lean back experience, you could be taking a nap on a couch and the TV's still playing and that'll serve as an ad impression. And, advertisers are paying for that and not getting the benefit. With OTT and streaming, it's much more trackable. Also, if you're integrating with mobile, for instance, or connected TVs, there's ways to see that consumers are actually watching what they're watching. I mean, if you ever watched a YouTube clip, after a while, it'll say you're still watching, right? Kind of wake up and make sure that you're engaged with that. So engagement is sort of the key here, not only for content but for advertising. And there's a lot of technologies we can get into about programmatic and targeted advertising that gives the advertisers the confidence that what they're paying for is actually getting served up to the target customers that they want.
Now, it feels like advertisers were relatively slow to this space, and maybe that's a misperception on my part. But given the measurability, was it a matter of audience size that they were just hesitant to make the move and move the dollar simply because they didn't think the audiences were as big on the streaming side?
That's 100% right. I think they got not complacent, but sort of comfortable with this model that you would pay for something that had broad reach, but not totally measurable. I mean, if you look at the magazine kind of advertising market, that's a great example where subscriptions were overinflated. The actual number of subscribers they had, and you'd pay for that, and you'd be like, okay, who actually turned to that page? Same thing, not as bad, but in cable and satellite, you would have you're reaching a broad audience. And so initially they sort of poo-pooed a little bit the whole OTT and streaming sort of trend is that's just kind of niche, right? There's not enough eyeballs there, but that has really changed. And by some analysts' estimates, we've now flipped where there's more advertising going into digital and streaming sort of content and distribution than into traditional, cable and satellite advertising.
And as you think about that measurability, these are smaller and niche audiences, but are the advertisers attracted to this specifically because that's who they're looking for and they know they have a captive audience on those streaming and on demand platforms?
Yeah, it's not only that they have a captive audience, it's that they're capturing that audience in the way that those consumers actually operate today. Because if you think about it, if you look at your time spent on any media, TV is not even number one, right? So you have to look at gaming. It depends on the demographic. Gaming, social media. There's a lot of other things that consumers are doing. So they're surrounded by devices. They're on laptops. They got their phone. They got their TV. And so this idea of being able to sort of track the consumer across all those devices and provide this surround sound effect, right, for advertisers, where you see the brand everywhere. Some of it you're engaging, some of it's in the background. That's very powerful for consumers. And studies have shown that consumers need to see a brand maybe 6 or 7 times before they finally click on something or say, "Yeah, that sounds interesting. I'll investigate it." So this sort of comprehensive approach that includes video streaming, digital, is very attractive for advertisers.
As you're looking at the leaders in this space who are doing this well, are you seeing any advertising integration models aside from the old 30-second clip or 15-second clip? Are they doing a better job of baking in the brand awareness into the content itself? We hear a lot about influencers as an example where they'll speak to the value of the product and work it into the plot line or work it into the program itself.
Yeah, and that social is another a great example of where they can integrate, ads that are sort of teasers for content. They kind of work together. They can have influencers, they can have sponsors on the promo, and you have to also look at the whole sort of value chain and distribution model for content itself, right? It's not just going from a broadcast station to a TV set. It's going through the pipe to connected TV, for instance. There's a home screen. There might be an app. So there's many different, sort of stop points along that value chain that could be an ad impression. You can have an ad on the home screen on your TV. You can have an ad that is pre-roll before a video starts to play. So it really opens up a whole cornucopia of ad impression opportunities that are clickable and trackable. And what advertisers love about that is they can really experiment, and they can measure that, and they can say, we'll try all these different types of formats, a 5 second here on YouTube and a 30 second here, and let's see what brings in the eyeballs and what brings in the click throughs to whatever the ask is, the call to action.
What is your community seeing about the demographics here? Are It was always assumed that younger people would be the first ones to adopt the new forms of media, and that they were the first ones to jump on things like Netflix when it debuted and Hulu as it debuts and so forth. But at some point, you're going to get everybody else in the marketplace that maybe decides to cancel their cable package and move over to these devices. Are we seeing a generational divide in how people adopt these new media streams?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's where the canary is in the coal mine. And a lot of the traditional, media entertainment properties are saying, "Oh my gosh, the sort of demographic watching cable TV is 50 plus." Right? That doesn't bode well for the future. If you look at, my kids are in college now, when they get out of college, they're not calling up Comcast and signing up for a cable service right away. They're already comfortable. They've got, Disney Plus. They've got Netflix. They might have a couple of others. Peacock. They might be sharing, and it's very much driven based on the content they watch. This whole idea, I don't know if you remember, like, Thursday night TV. There were certain brands that kind of popped up for that. It's not that anymore. My kids get Peacock because they love FIFA. They love watching European soccer, right? And so they just do a search and, like, that's available on Peacock, and they'll sign up for that. But the challenge is engagement and consumer subscriber churn, right? So it's really hard to keep that connection going because they can hop from one service to another, which also presents challenges for advertisers because they may have a campaign that works really well for a month or two, and that doesn't mean it's going to work, month 3 or 4 after that, because the dynamics have, dramatically changed.
What does the research tell us about that? How long people stick with any one streaming service on average?
It's less than a year. There's a lot of studies right now where that show that consumers will pick one or two core platforms like Disney or Warner Brothers Discovery or Netflix, and then they have niche things around that. If you like British content, it might be BritBox, right? If you like more of a full service, what we call a virtual MVPD, which is sort of a replacement cable company, but you like soccer and Spanish language programming, it might be Fubo TV. So you have this whole idea of matching the consumer to the content option they want is a big challenge for consumers because there's so much content. It's not all exclusive. Some of it you may find on multiple different streaming apps or channels, and they just want to get to their show if they even know what they want to watch. And so content discovery and navigation is one of the big challenges in the industry right now.
And what does that mean for these companies as they're trying to project their own revenues going forward? If you're only counting on people to stick around for a year on that subscription model, and that churn is significant, what is the business approach to try to reduce that churn?
Well, they look at key metrics, and the old metrics don't work very well. So, one of the key metrics in any kind of subscription based industry is average revenue per user, ARPU. And that could be a monthly measure usually. And what they're finding is even within the month, people are coming and going. So, they have to look at other metrics like the total number of hours watched, titles started, engagement metrics, and there's a whole bunch there to show that consumers are engaging with their content and likely to stick with it. Now, what we found is some other research that is done by Magid, is a big consultancy in this space that shows that there's actually good churn and bad churn. Some of the churn is consumers that you want to have that are going to pay for content, but they're very sophisticated. So if they see another new show that they like, they're going to jump to that, but they'll come back to you. It's not like they're abandoning and rejecting your service, your channel, your app, whatever it might be. They're just engaging with what you have available. So as long as you offer good content, they'll come back to you. Then there's bad churn where there's a customer sort of cutting the virtual or digital cord saying, you know what, we just don't see value in that package anymore. We've watched all the Disney and Star Wars, Legacy, all those different shows. That universe is spent, and we're moving on. That's bad churn because now they've sort of exhausted what they've been getting out of your service.
And then as advertisers are looking for value out of this, obviously there's everything from just being brand aware, having your brand in front of the right people all the time and getting that credibility. And then there's those who are really focused on just the return. You know, they want to be able to convert a sale as quickly as possible. I would imagine that streaming and on demand isn't quite as successful as social media or direct ads where you can click and be on your website and be shopping within seconds. But how are advertisers looking at their metric of success on these platforms?
Yeah, it's a good point. It's sort of in the middle. I mean, you've always had the big advertisers that are going to sponsor Wimbledon, or the U.S. Open, and they're the big brand impressions. How that's not very trackable, right? Yeah, you can see people tuning in and watching golf or watching tennis, but that doesn't mean they're going to buy a car. But you have to do that to build sort of that global brand. Then you have the very clickable, where you're tracking CPMS and click throughs directly to your storefront on Amazon, and they're going to buy something. And that's like immediate. And that's really relevant, obviously, for social media. I would say the streaming market is somewhere in between. It's not quite as clickable as sort of social or a digital, an email impression or whatever it might be, because you're building that sort of larger brand presence and visibility. But it is more sort of clickable, I guess is probably not the right word, than just a traditional kind of broadcast sponsorship of some big industry event like the Super Bowl or something.
What does your research tell you about the satisfaction with these platforms? Are some getting it right and the industry is moving in their direction? Are some, I mean, we've seen some come and go already. So
Right.
obviously they were doing something wrong. What does the research tell us?
Well, the research tells us that consumers love having options, but it's the paradox of choice. They hate having too many options. They hate the process of kind of like we did back in the 80s. We went to Blockbuster and spent an hour looking for, or longer, looking for a movie for the family to all agree on. That still happens, right? You still go into your portal of content and you spend 20, 30 minutes and trying to find a movie, and then you might just go back to the same movie you've seen like five times, right? So that's a challenge. You mentioned AI. There's technologies that can help with that over time to help you kind of curate that experience. And so it's kind of a love hate relationship. It's getting better. Folks look at services like Netflix as doing a pretty good job of tailoring the content choices to my past viewing behavior, which is great. The challenge is consumers have different modes. There's times when I just want you to know who I am based on my past behavior and recommend a good title that I'll just be able to watch within 2 minutes of you offering it to me. But there's other times I'm kind of a little bit more explorative, and I want you to suggest something that is not based on my past behavior, not based on the data, that can sort of lead me to new forms of content I hadn't really discovered before. So there's a balance. I think the industry's sort of getting better. I think the explosion of fast channels has created a bit more of a challenge because it's such a low bar to throw a fast channel up on, on a service and start attracting eyeballs, that it just becomes one more sort of tile, so to speak, on this paradox of consumer choice, and just becomes somewhat bewildering to them. So if you know exactly what you want, streaming's great because you can search on it and you can find it on your, which service you want to watch it on. But if you're kind of more in a browsing mentality, it can be a little bit more tedious.
And how does the industry look at something like YouTube, which has always been designed as a maybe look up something that you're interested in for a few minutes, maybe you'll do a little DIY around the house, it's some teaching videos. But I've known people who will spend 2 hours on that
Hmm.
platform just watching 15 videos. It's different. It's not an over the top model, right? It wasn't
Hmm.
designed to do that, and yet it seems to be competing directly with screen time. How does the industry look at it? How are they trying to leverage it?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, YouTube was the original over the top player, right? Because they were taking user generated content in a very consumable form and then stringing it together. So yes, your friend can watch for 2 hours because it's just what's up next. It just plays it. It's related. You go down these rabbit holes of content, but as long as the consumer's enjoying it, engaging with it, and again, they'll send those little pop-ups like you're still watching. You're getting advertising. Everybody's happy. So there's a lot of lessons to be learned there, and there's also YouTube TV, which is more of a traditional package to replace your cable package. So I think a lot of the folks that I consult with in the media and entertainment space look at YouTube TV, look at YouTube and say, we need to be more like that, more of almost like a game interface or YouTube interface, more of a digital interface as opposed to your traditional electronic programming guide where you just see like a grid and you're like, okay, at 7 o'clock this is playing. So I think more and more there's sort of a lot of lessons to be learned there, and in some ways I think they're sort of a leader in sort of how consumers engage with content.
And then as you think about the future of the business models here, it's hard to imagine that all of these providers are going to survive long term. At some point, this is an industry that's been known for its consolidation. How close do you think we are to seeing some major either acquisitions or mergers of these large OTT providers?
Well, we've already seen it, and even the big players are looking at their full portfolio. You look at Disney and ESPN, and they've been kind of talking about finding a home for that. We've already had big mergers, Warner Brothers, Discovery, and so that's going to continue to happen. And it's like any industry. You get to a point and there's that famous collapse of the middle, right? You never want to be in the middle. You either want to super serve a niche audience, the long tail, whatever you want to call it, and know that audience and give them exactly what they want. It may not be the biggest audience, it may not be the biggest content library, but they're very loyal and their engagement's high, and advertisers love that too. Or you want to have scale and you want to have a massive library of different content options, and you want to have distribution across global distribution. You want to be partnered with every connected TV platform, and so being in the middle is bad. And I think that's where a lot of the players are right now, and they're saying, okay, this content may not be exclusive because we don't have the budget for original content, and if it's not exclusive and it can be found elsewhere, what is our reason for being? How are we going to pay the bills? And eventually that kind of works its way out. Either they go under or they get acquired.
And where is that trend on exclusivity? It feels like we've got more and more programs, scripted programs that are popping up on different, streaming channels. It feels like every month. And then there are other things like entire sports leagues that are signing exclusive deals to
Hmm.
have their content only on one provider. Like I think famously Apple Plus and Major League Soccer here in the U.S. this year, that was an exclusive deal. Do you think we're going to see more of that exclusivity? Or is there a natural need for some of the content to be able to move between platforms every couple of years?
Yeah, Brian, I think you're hitting on the conundrum here, right? And also these two competing forces. In one sense, on the scale side, you have a breaking down of what we traditionally call the walled garden, where you'd have exclusive content you could only find on, Apple or Disney or Netflix or whatever. And then on the other side, you have these marquee sort of tentpole, content titles or properties like FIFA, like MLS, like whatever it might be, And sports is a good example of that because by definition, it is exclusive, right? There's one set of rights to it that you can negotiate worldwide through any kind of streaming type of platform. And again, being in the middle is not where you want to be. So you look at the regional sports networks that are under a lot of stress because they're sort of in the middle, right? When a sports league can go direct to consumer, why do you need that sort of regional sports network, right? If leagues and conferences, if you look at college athletics, for instance, can negotiate their own deals with the media, they don't necessarily need that middleman. So, yeah, you're seeing kind of both things happen. You're seeing a breakdown of the walled gardens around exclusivity. After all, if you're a Disney or a Netflix or an Amazon, if you can generate more revenue and people can get access to your content and you have broader distribution, that's a good thing. But if you really want to drive subscriptions and you can sign that contract with MLS, and now you've got Lionel Messi there, and all boats rise, and there's billions of dollars floating around, then it's worth to really kind of tie that up and make it exclusive.
And are there any concerns about the socioeconomic implications here? Obviously, the lower income you have, presumably, you're not going to be paying for many or any of these services. You might be more reliant on the more traditional broadcast models. Or I know that in some cities and towns, there's some subsidies for those who are having a cable and internet service. I don't think anything like that would exist for the over the top subscription services.
Mhm.
Is the industry talking about this idea that there may be some content that's getting to a certain socioeconomic demographic and then other content that makes it to people with lower incomes but still have the same news and information needs as everybody else? And how are they thinking about trying to bridge that?
Yeah, I think that's been a concern in the media and entertainment industry for a very long time. I think the challenge has been getting access to the underserved folks that may not have broadband connectivity, and the U.S. government, Congress has passed laws to sort of promote that. But OTT is really sort of democratizing content in a lot of ways. The barriers to be able to launch a new channel targeted at specific demographics have gone way down. We have new channels like Afroland and the Africa Channel that didn't exist a few years ago. Fuse Media, there's a lot of really great content options now that consumers and even on the lower socioeconomic spectrum, they're more sophisticated than people give them credit for. They know what content they like, they can go get it. If you're a Dominican immigrant and you like the telenovelas that you get back home, you have OTT services now that can deliver that to you at low cost, right? And low cost could be free, right? Because it's advertised, or it's a fast business model. So I think overall, streaming and OTT have democratized access to content, and overall, I think that's a good trend for the industry.
In the time we have left, I'd love to give you an opportunity to share a little bit more about your company and what you do and how people can find you and more about your work.
Thanks, Brian. So also have a podcast. It's called OTT Executive Podcast. You can find it on all the major channels. We also have a video forum that's on YouTube where we interview leaders in the media and entertainment industry. Most of our work these days is behind the scenes consulting. We work on content creation for players, for companies that are trying to either grow their presence in the OTT market or establish it or get a footprint on North America or some other geography. And that could include white papers, that could include webinars, that could include sort of more internal board level strategy. But it also can still include our traditional research where we work. Right now, we're working on a study on user experience. We're working on some content around communities, kind of bridging video and social. So that's sort of our what pays the bills. We also have a conference coming up next month. It's virtual this year. That OTT Executive Summit. So you can check that out online.
Excellent. We'll include links to this in the description of this podcast. Ryan Mahoney, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Brian. It's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Hopefully, you found that conversation as intriguing as I did, and you'll follow up on some of the links in this podcast to learn more about Brian, his community, his work, and his research company, and see how they might be able to answer questions specific to you and to your business. Thanks to Brian again for taking the time to join us. Our next episode is going to be a really important one, really fascinating one, and a guest I've been looking forward to speaking to for some time. Nick Palmerini is going to be joining us from the National Innovation Center on Aging in the UK. And that conversation is going to be about so much more than just the general topic of aging in society. We've had some of those conversations on this podcast before. This interview is really going to be a holistic view of the individual, a community, family structure, and society as a whole, and looked at through both an academic and a very practical human lens. It was a great conversation. Nick and I have already recorded that. We're just getting it ready for production now. And honestly, even I, as the host of the program who did the interview, it was such an important conversation that we covered so much ground. I'm going to need to go back and listen to it a few times. And, I'm in the editing process right now. It gives me a natural opportunity to listen back to some of the conversation. But I really, really think you're going to find it to be one of our most important and one that you're going to want to share with your friends and your family. And so stay tuned for that. That program is next in our series. And we have other so great guests coming up that each of you are going to find interesting in different regards. We've got topics ranging from alternative medicine, although as we get into that conversation, you'll understand why that terminology is a little bit complicated. We talk about foreign policy, which we've been looking forward to getting to on this program. We will go around the world and take a look at conflicts in the Middle East, Ukraine, big geopolitical strategic decisions being made on both sides of the Atlantic and Pacific for that matter. And we'll also spend some time reflecting and thinking about the nature of wellness and all the things that play into that for every aspect of our lives. We are building a community of curious minds here, and we invite you to join it by subscribing to this podcast. Anywhere you get your podcasts, you can find this program. My show is available widely on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts. We are on Amazon Music. We're on the Audible app. We're on the iHeartRadio app as well as Odyssey. And we still are on the Google Podcast, although I know that that platform is going through some changes. But for now, as long as it's available, you can find our show there. And you can share this also with anybody, anywhere, anytime. Links to all of those podcast platforms are available on my website, brianjmatos.com. You can find me on any of your favorite social media platforms, and show clips are available on YouTube each week as we preview the conversations that we're having with these wonderful experts who are joining our community of curious minds. As always, thank you for listening. I look forward to talking to you again on the next episode. And don't forget to stay curious.